The story I'm about to tell you is crazy, but it's the complete truth. Everything had started a few months ago when I decided to create a profile on Tinder. I uploaded some nice pictures and started the process of swiping. Suddenly I had matched with this really handsome guy. We started chatting. He was intelligent, good looking, and really well mannered. The combination of these things almost seemed too good to be true to me. After about a week of chatting though, he had asked to meet up with me, which of course I agreed to. We had decided to arrange a date at a local restaurant, which I knew. I had arrived on time, but he wasn't there yet. I think that I waited for maybe about 15 to 20 minutes when suddenly an old man then approached me. He said,
"Hey, can I sit next to you, darling?"
I answered, I'm waiting for someone, sir."
"Yeah, I know. I'm Joe's dad."
The man then said, his dad? Where's Joe?" Suddenly the man jumped and then he started shouting,
"You hoe! Of course you're no different. Am I not good enough for you? Let's go and I'll bring you to your freaking Joe."
Right after these words, he had grabbed my arm and then tried to pull me right out of the restaurant. Thank God that the waitress that was standing nearby came to my rescue. Then the man backed off. For over an hour, I was just way too shocked to leave that restaurant, so I pretty much just sat there and drank wine. When I decided it was time to go, I realized I was a little bit tipsy, and then I started searching for a taxi. One was actually standing right next to the restaurant, so I just came up to it and asked the driver whether he was free to bring me home. However, as soon as I stood next to his taxi window, I looked inside and I saw that same old creepy guy from the restaurant. He once again tried to pull me inside of it, but I managed to escape and then called the police. When the police arrived, I had told them everything that happened. I think that they arrested the man, but I don't really know, as I never really saw him again after that. When I got home that night, I decided to delete Tinder right off my phone. So yeah, after that experience, I really don't think I'll be using it ever again. During the quarantine, I've been on Tinder trying to get to know new girls. I got a few matches here and there, but none of them ever really materialized. That is, until a few days ago, I matched with a girl. We'll call her Bree. We messaged on the app for quite a while, and she asked me for my Snapchat. I decided that that would probably be more fun to talk to on anyways, so I give it to her. We add each other on Snapchat, and then she asks if she can come over so that we can quote-unquote do things. I politely declined due to the fact that I literally just met her and I'm not full set on looking for that. She seems pretty upset about it and then keeps asking once again to come over. I keep telling her though that that's just not what I'm looking for right now. For a while, she then stopped sending messages. Eventually, after about 10 minutes, I then get a message saying, "I'll be seeing you soon." I message her back saying that I don't know what she means. About 30 minutes go by and I then get a picture from her. It looks to be like a streetlight on a really dark road. At this point in time, it's between 12:30 and 1 in the morning, and I'm wondering what she's doing out. I ask her what she's doing and I get another picture. This time, however, it's a picture of a baseball diamond in the dark. I kind of look at it for a second, wondering why it looks so familiar to me. That's when I then realized that the reason it looks familiar is because it's the diamond that's across the street from my house. I message her back and I tell her to stop. She opens the message, starts to type, and then stops. A few minutes pass and I start to think she's gone. I then look out my window to see if she's still across the street. I then see the dark outline of what appears to be about 3 people standing around a car. While looking through my blinds, a light flashes on me and I hear someone in the group then yell, "There he is." I close all of my blinds and curtains and then I go check the locks on my doors. I start to hear knocking on my front door. This is followed by a woman's voice then yelling, Let me in right now. I called the police and I asked for them to send a car my way immediately. I live in a small town, so we don't really have that many police officers. The station then tells me that the police just dealt with a previous call and that they're going to do a drive-by in a few minutes. I then yelled at the door that I just called the police. About a minute later, I then hear the squeal of tires. I look out my window and the car is gone now. The police pull in my driveway and come to the door and talk to me, but they said that they don't see anything. I tell them everything that happened, but I don't really have any proof that they were there. I had thanked the police for showing up, and then they take off. After they left, I had checked all of the doors and windows in my house, and I go to my room. I decided to look at my Snapchat so that I could try and figure out how she found me. I looked at my Snap map, and I realized that it somehow turned back on even after I turned my location off. I deactivate it again and go back to sleep. She messaged me the next day that she hopes she can see me again, and the next meeting goes way better. Following that message, I then blocked her and reported her on Tinder. This was 3 days ago now. If anything else happens, I'll definitely post an update. I hope this is a lesson for anyone that uses location on Snapchat. It's very dangerous. Okay, so I have an update. It's currently about 1:30 in the morning while I'm writing this. It had been about a week since my previous encounter with that girl from Tinder. I thought that she had moved on. I was wrong. I had heard her car pulling across the street just like I did the first time. I looked outside, but the car looked different, so I didn't think it was her. I decided to wait a while, then look back out again. The car was still there, headlights on and car running. First try at the picture, my camera switched to flash. I quickly turned it on, then took a second picture. The first picture's flash must have been bright enough for them to see it, because right after I took the second picture, the car door opened. Out steps a man dressed in all black. He's wearing a mask. I'm not really sure how to properly describe it because I've never seen one like it before. The man starts walking towards my house and it looks like he has something in his hand. At this point, I know I need to act quickly or that this could go really bad. I quickly call the cops and the dispatcher tells me to stay on the line while the police come. My house is about 5 blocks away from the police station, but this time they're still there. The man tries to run back to his car, but the police stop him before he could. I go outside to talk to the police. They went on to tell me that the man had a knife and all the man told him was,
He knows who sent me.
The police then asked me if it has anything to do with why they came last time. I tell them that it does, and that's why the man's there. I told them as much as I could about the girl, then they leave. They promised to tell me if they find anything else out about the case, and that they're also going to drive by more at night. Now I'm going to be up all night long watching the street for other cars. I think tomorrow morning I'm going to go stay at a friend's house until I feel better about this. I'll keep everyone updated if anything else ever happens, but I really hope this is the end of it. In March of this year, I had started talking to this guy that I matched with on Tinder. We'll call him Jack. He started out super kind and sweet to me, but being the naive girl that I am, I trusted him. I still lived in my college's dorm at the time, but was lucky enough to have a single room, so I invited him over to see me. When we first met, I didn't really see any red flags at the time, except for the fact that he got attached to me way too quickly. But as I'm not that confident, it felt really good to have his attention. I'm not going to lie, we did sleep together that night, and he then came over 2 other nights after that. But he was moving out of state and back to California a week after we met, but as it's always been a dream of mine to move to Cali, it wasn't really a big deal. So a couple of days after he moved, I admitted to him that I smoke, and he started to show major red flags at this information. It wasn't the fact that he didn't like me smoking that threw me off. It was the fact that he told me that he couldn't continue talking to me because of it. At that point, I felt really connected with him, and I'm gonna be honest. Him telling me that actually made me cry a little bit. But I played it off as harsh, and I told him to screw off, and if he couldn't accept the one negative thing, I shouldn't care about what he thought. And that's when I blocked him on Snapchat. So I'll admit, I had a regular friend with benefits before I started talking to Jack, and he asked me if he could come over that night. Impulsively, I said yes. I thought that it would make me forget what Jack said, but as I waited for the guy to come over, Jack started texting me and then apologizing me for being so rude, and apparently he just wanted to see how I'd react if he told me he couldn't talk to me. But as I had an emotionally abusive ex who did the same stuff to me and honestly messed me up really badly, I saw it as a major no. But Jack just continued to call and text me. I tried ignoring it as my guy friend was over and told him to ignore my phone going off. But when he fell asleep in my bed, I had finally answered the text. Since I'm way too nice of a person, I gave in talking to him and decided to give him a second chance. Really big mistake. The next night, I went to a party with my friend. Let's call my friend Lilia. Well, I had drunkenly told her about the whole situation and how Jack was really rude to me, and all of the red flags he showed the night before. Pretty much instantly, she knew that it was a really bad situation for me to be in, and I allowed her to take my phone and then block Jack on everything. Honestly, it felt like a really good thing to do. But Lilia brought me back to my dorm and I saw a new phone number was texting and calling me. Drunkenly, I had answered the phone and Jack was on the line. I was crying at this point and texting Lilia about the whole situation and that I just couldn't hang up for some reason. Lilia drove back and I went back down to her car. She took my phone from me and told Jack that he was being really creepy at this point and he really just needed to leave me alone, and that I just didn't want anything to do with him at all moving forward. But Jack kept going on about how much he loved me and that he wouldn't leave me alone, and that he was going to be seeing me the following Tuesday when he came back to Wisconsin. I was terrified at this point. I was telling this guy to just leave me alone, but he wouldn't take a hint. Lilia and I blocked the new number, and then a third unknown number then started to call and text me. Once again, I blocked it, and he then proceeded to use another number as well as WhatsApp, a second Instagram, and he found my Facebook. This guy was crazy. At this point, I was totally freaking out about this. We blocked him once again, and he actually stopped. Well, for a little while. Lilia then told me that I should email my RA about the threat to come to me on Tuesday, and I actually did just that. I asked her if we could talk in person. Over the next few days, I ended up blocking a total of 9 new phone numbers from Jack, as well as 3 Instagrams, 2 Facebooks, and 2 Snapchats. On Sunday, I was finally able to tell my RA about the entire situation, who proceeded to call in the hall manager, who I had to tell as well. After telling them about it, a police officer was called. He took a report of the situation and how I didn't feel safe. To be completely honest, at that point, my phone totally scared me. I was really nervous to be in my dorm as Jack had made multiple threats to come and find me as well as force himself on me. The officer couldn't really do much as Jack had moved to another state, but he had took his phone number and then called him, explaining that he was an officer and that Jack just really needed to leave me alone. Apparently, Jack said he understood and that he wouldn't be contacting me ever again. So about 12 hours went by and I didn't hear from him. I proceeded to move into a new dorm building with the help of friends. I had a new dorm and all of the staff within my new and old building had a picture of my stalker, so they were instructed not to allow him into the building. But even after the officer called Jack, he still continued to harass me until that Tuesday. He used another 4 or 5 numbers to contact me, and to be completely honest, my anxiety was really high. My friends were with me 24/7, ensuring that I had never walked alone to or from class, or even to my dorm at night. After that Tuesday, he didn't contact me again. About a month and a half ago now, Jack had used a new number to message me. At this point, I was starting to become myself again and feeling really comfortable with being on my phone again. But of course, it just couldn't stay that way. I proceeded to block about 3 more phone numbers that he had used to contact me that night. Thankfully, I haven't heard from Jack since then, but I'm still really fearful whenever I have an unknown number pop up on my screen, as I just never really know if it's him or not. Jack, if you happen to hear this story, please just leave me the hell alone and never contact me ever again. I'm begging you. I'm mostly a lurker on here, but I've considered sharing my story several times. I was really hesitant because absolutely no one knows about this. Not my family, nor my friends. I've held on to this for about 10 years now, and I figured it was time to let it out. Plus, I think there's some really valuable lessons that can be learned from my experience. Here we go. For reference, I'm a 27-year-old female, and the story takes place about 10 years ago when I was 17. I had just started university, and I was really excited about having a fresh new start since I'd always been a really nerdy outcast in high school. I never had a boyfriend before, and I'd never been on a date, so I was really naive and optimistic about boys. My introverted and awkward personality hadn't magically changed since entering university, so it's safe to say that I didn't really meet any interesting guys at school. One late night, I was in my room working on an assignment on my laptop when I then received a request on MSN Messenger. The email address was a boy's name with some numbers. The name was clearly ethnic and likely someone of the same origin as me. Very intrigued, I accepted. For the sake of the story, we'll call this boy Ken. We got to chatting and I asked him how he had gotten my email address. He dodged the question. I let it go, not really thinking too much of it. This was from the time when it was pretty normal to accept anyone and everyone as a friend on Facebook as well as other social media platforms. As Ken and I continued to talk, I learned that he lived in my city and apparently wasn't much older than me. As I had guessed, our roots were in fact in the same country, India. I asked him why he didn't have a picture of himself on his display picture, and this prompted him to suggest that we turn on our webcams because he wanted to see me too. I declined, but he just kept insisting. Somehow he convinced me, and then we both switched on our webcams. I was pleasantly surprised and somewhat relieved to see that Ken was a really good-looking young guy and chatting to me from the comfort of his bedroom, seemingly very normal. Our MSN chats then carried on for a couple of weeks. They developed into texts, and we even had a few phone calls after I had agreed to give him my number. I started to develop a crush on Ken. He asked me to go out with him a couple of times, but I was always really busy with school and our schedules were just never lining up. Finally, we found one afternoon when we were both free and we decided to schedule a lunch date. Ken had a car and he offered to pick me up from university after I was done for the day. I was a little too dressed up for my C+ programming class, but just right for the lunch date. We planned to go to a local vegetarian restaurant. Stupidly enough, I didn't really tell any of my friends where I was going or with whom because I was just really embarrassed about going on my very first date, especially at almost 18 with someone who had randomly added me on MSN. I waited outside my building when a black car with heavily tinted windows pulled up beside me. The passenger side window rolled down and sure enough, there was Ken just sitting in the driver's seat. I was happy to see that he was as cute in person as he was on webcam. However, what I wasn't expecting was the intense smell of weed floating out of the car. Not really relevant, but part of that first impression. Admittedly, I was a bit taken aback and was really concerned that he might be driving high. He unlocked the doors and motioned for me to get in, and so I did without dispute. As I sat down in the passenger seat, he immediately put his hand right on my thigh. I very nervously then shifted my leg away. So, I started. "Do you know where the restaurant is? I can guide you if you want." He smirked at me but didn't really say anything and just started driving. Okay, I mean, kinda weird. I thought maybe he was nervous or awkward, both of which I would sympathize with, so I just let it be. I was about to try my hand at a little small talk, which I'm really no good at, when I then noticed him heading right towards the highway ramp. I started to worry because the restaurant wasn't that far from my campus, and there was really no reason for us to be getting on the highway. You don't need to take the highway. The restaurant is really close by. I can guide you. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear my own nervousness. Ken finally spoke for the first time since I'd gotten into the car.
I thought that maybe we could just go to my place instead. We can play Need for Speed and I can make lunch for you.
I was 17 years old, on my way to the house of a guy that I just met for the very first time, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going. My mind was racing. I knew that this would be an utterly stupid thing to do. Despite the clear red flags waving in my face, I had decided that I didn't want to ruin our first date by rejecting his offer to make me lunch and play NFS together, which I had told him I liked playing. So like an idiot, I reluctantly agreed to avoid being rude. We made it to his house. It was apparently his family's home and was situated in a sort of shady neighborhood. We stepped inside and of course no one except us was home. It was sparsely furnished and looked unkempt, which struck me as pretty odd for a family home. He informed me that his Xbox was in his bedroom. I hesitated in the doorway, but he sat at the foot of his bed in front of the TV and then patted the empty space beside him for me to have a seat. There was literally nowhere else to sit in his room, so I cautiously sat down, keeping as much distance as I could between us. I started to relax as we played NFS and he made us PB&Js to munch on. I was about to laugh at myself for being overly paranoid when Ken then did something really bizarre. He got up onto the bed and then sat down directly behind me, his legs on the other side of me, and then tried to guide my hands on the controller. I had started to ask him what he was doing, and as if this wasn't uncomfortable enough, his hands then moved from the controller and then slid up under my shirt. That's when I really started to panic. I thought that he was going to try and grope my chest, but instead he then started squeezing and actually massaging my belly. I was more than a little chubby back then, so you can imagine what that might have been like. I dropped the controller in pure shock, quickly stood up, and then fixed my shirt. I was at a total loss for words, and he did nothing but then smirk at me and tell me that he liked it. I felt completely disgusted and totally violated. I'd had enough. I had lied and I told him that I had a group project that I really needed to work on and that I needed to go. He asked where I lived so that he could drop me home. Thankfully, I had the common sense not to tell him that, and I asked him to drop me off at school instead, where I would be supposedly meeting up with my classmates. He obliged. After our very uncomfortable first date, I decided that I didn't want to talk to Ken anymore. I didn't block him on MSN or on my phone, our only two methods of communication, but I rarely responded to any of his messages and I always ignored his calls. Once he had messaged me on MSN around 11 p.m. asking me to come over and telling me that he would send a cab to bring me over to his place. Thoroughly annoyed, I then responded, "What do you take me for? Why do you even think I would want to do that?" He then replied saying,
"No sex, I promise."
It was just bizarre. I was so disgusted and I didn't even respond. He continued trying to get in touch with me for months, and then suddenly he vanished. I figured that he'd finally gotten the point. Now, I really wish the story ended here, but it doesn't. I last heard from Ken in late February. He had stopped trying to contact me shortly after Valentine's Day. In April, 2 family members and I went on holiday to visit another relative, who we'll call Anne. She was living in the Caribbean at the time. Anne, whom I love dearly, was and still is a bit of an eccentric. She considers herself very spiritual and is an active member of a large, well-known spiritual organization. She's deeply connected with India and always goes back for frequent visits. While we stayed with her in the Caribbean, she had told us about her most recent spiritual trip to India, where she met a really wealthy and well-connected local woman through the organization, who quickly became a very close friend. Let's call her Connie. During our visit, Anne introduced us to Connie virtually over Skype, because Connie lives in India. We chatted with her a couple of times throughout our vacation through Skype and got to know her a little bit. Little did we know back then that Connie, who Anne had spontaneously met halfway across the world in India, would soon wreak utter havoc on our lives. Now, that's a story that I'm just not and may never be ready to tell because of how many lives were affected by it and the severity of the damage that had been inflicted. What you need to know is that Connie was an outright criminal and a con artist who had been targeting our family long before Anne had actually met her. Their meeting was no coincidence. Not only did she manage to steal over $100K from our family, but she took any peace of mind or sense of security that we ever had. When we had finally caught on and confronted her, she insisted that we were mistaken, but then disappeared into thin air once we forced her out of our lives. You're probably wondering what on earth this has to do with the story about Ken. Well, get this. The situation with Connie lasted many months. The whole thing is kind of a blur to me now, but we first spoke to her online in April, and I remember the whole ordeal lasting well into the fall. While she normally resided in India, Anne had invited her to visit and stay with us where we presently live. That's where things really took a turn for the worse. Some of the things I clearly remember and are important to the story were that 1. The whole time she was staying with us, she was trying to convince me to transfer schools to a very obscure school and program in the US, and was actually getting very pushy about it. And 2, she asked me if I was a virgin and told me to save myself for my husband. Really disturbing, I know. During this time, I was so emotionally drained and stressed that I didn't really think of anything but the situation at hand. In fact, I had stopped socializing almost entirely and even started frequently skipping classes. I had lost contact with my high school friends, and my university friends were way too new to really care, so my strange behavior and new destructive habits went unnoticed. Fast forward to one day after Connie's final disappearance in the fall. I was at home with my dad when my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and it was a number I didn't have saved, so it was showing the contact information as whatever name the phone was registered under. My heart then dropped right into my stomach. My phone displayed the name. The first name was a man's name, and the last name was the same last name as Connie's. I started to panic and then ran into my bedroom to answer the call. I had no idea what to expect. When I picked up the phone, I was then greeted by a familiar voice. It was Ken. I honestly thought I was going to puke when I came to a sudden realization that he had actually been a part of this whole sick plot. Of course, I didn't have any hard evidence to prove that he was connected to Connie, but let me explain. The timing of his appearance and reappearance into my life, the last name, and the fact that he had contacted me out of the blue and I had no idea why or how were just way too bizarre to be a mere coincidence. Of course, I totally freaked out at Ken when he called, and I told him that if he ever called me again, I would call the police. His response back was just a really weird dry half laugh, and then he said back,
Well, okay then.
in the most creepy voice you can think of. Then he hung up. I just knew in my gut that this was their last attempt to get back in touch and somehow slither their way back into mine and my family's lives. Thankfully though, I had never heard from Ken again after that day. A while after this all happened, I was having a conversation with a family member who was really closely involved in all of this. We were talking about the whole ordeal, and she told me that she sensed something extremely wrong when Connie was pushing to have me sent off to the US to that obscure school. She had an unshakable feeling that Connie was involved in some sort of human trafficking scene, and that if I left, she would never see me again. Right at that time was when the horrifying pieces came together for me. I was just too damn naive to have seen it before. The memories totally flooded back to me when I heard that. How Ken had told me no sex, I promise, when he invited me over, and how Connie was telling me to remain a virgin. As I said, I had never told a soul about Ken nor about the weird V-card conversation with Connie. I strongly and firmly believed that Ken had been some sort of player in Connie's game and was really just there to keep me away from guys and prevent me from having a boyfriend. For those who may be wondering, we never called the police on Connie or Ken because nothing really illegal happened at face value. It's very hard to explain. I'll also mention that I tried to find Ken online many times after this all happened. I don't know why, I just felt like I wanted to expose him or call him out, but I wasn't able to find even a sliver of information on him. Not by the name Ken, nor by the name on the caller ID. It was as if he didn't even exist. Also, I'm really awful at directions and I didn't remember his address or where his house was exactly. I'm sorry if this story is convoluted or confusing. I'm trying to get my point across without giving out any names or too many details, which makes it a little challenging. I hope this can serve as a warning to young people to never trust anyone and to do your thorough checks on people, especially to those you meet online, and to always be very aware of wary people's intentions. Also, from this incident onward, I just really can't stomach a lot of these spiritual organizations. I never liked the idea of them to begin with. No judgment for those who are into that sort of thing. It's just definitely not for me. Stay safe, everyone. And to Ken and Connie, if I ever see either of you ever again, I'll definitely kick you in the face. Rot in hell.